Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Neil Roberts. How are you today, Neil?
I'm good, thank you, Mark. Glad to be here.
Yeah, fantastic. Neil is a counsellor, and I think I've mentioned many times in our work that having counsellors involved in many cases is a very important part of the whole process. I talk often about one stage in our business, we basically had 90% of our clients were seeing a counsellor at some stage through the process. 90% of the family. Sorry. So, there might be a family with mum, dad, 4 kids, and there was at least someone out of that family was seeing a counsellor. And so it's an important part of the whole estate and succession planning process. There's all sorts of things that we help clients with in regard to facilitation, the estate planning, succession planning, financial planning plays a part, and all those sorts of things. And certainly counselling and transition planning are very important parts. So welcome, Neil. This is the first time you've been on one of our question and answer sessions. And I thought with that very sterling American accent you don't have, you might like to just share how you've come out here, where from, and why you've chosen this path in life.
Yeah, well, just briefly, in a previous life, I lived in the UK in London. Was with my wife Tracy there back there in the day. I was a high school teacher for many years, teaching in the city, which was a challenge. And what I discovered was a lot of the work that I ended up doing was quite pastoral, and there was a lot of issues that you needed to help the students with and staff with. And I naturally gravitated into that, eventually left teaching, began my own counselling practice 28 years ago now, and have been working in that field. We came to Australia 27 years ago, and that was with my wife and family. We have 4 children, been married to Tracy for 40 years, which is a long time.
Service medal coming up now.
Well, I think you get less for murder. I think that's probably the one. So we've been that. So I've been in private practice here for that 27 years, working with couples and individuals. I also lecture in counselling courses at master's level and postgraduate level, and have been doing that for quite some time. So it's a passion. I love working with people. I love helping people find the way forward for them. It's very much about collaboration and working with each other. So it's helping people listen and be honest and authentic and deal with the realities that life throw up, which can be very challenging.
Yeah, one of the obvious things is, I guess, these days in the age of technology and so on, Neil, too, it's much easier for people to be able to book to see a counsellor, to book in a conversation and be able to use mediums such as this, Zoom calls and so on, to have those conversations. And so it's appropriate for people in rural areas to be able to connect with you on that level.
Totally. It's one of the things. There's very few things we can thank COVID for, but this is one of them. It has actually moved us into this world where we now use the online technology much more effectively. And I would say probably half of my work is done via Zoom, and I work with people in Sydney, Melbourne, across the country, and that sometimes abroad. And, again, it gives us that capacity to reach people who previously would find it very difficult to get support or find help.
Yeah, look, straight to the key question here, Neil, and that is, what is it that you do that helps couples and families work better together? What is it that you bring to the table that, more importantly, rather than focusing on yourself, I want to ask, how, let's talk about the people that you work with. What do they need to allow them to work better together?
Probably the most important thing for people is to feel that they get heard. So often in families and in relationship situations, people don't feel like their parents, partner, children, whatever it is listening or ever hears them. So when they come to counselling, one of the most important things is they experience being heard, and they experience their perspective being understood and accepted as real and true for them. So for a lot of people, that's the starting place. They have a voice, they find a voice, and they're able to express what is important and matters to them. Because so often in family dynamics, there is a real tension and struggle for people to be able to be open, authentic, and honest about what's going on for them.
Absolutely. Knowing that our work, Neil, is very much focused on rural families all across
Yep.
all parts of Australia and New Zealand next week as well.
Yes, how exciting.
We've got had clients over there before, but spending a bit of time over in New Zealand next week at one of their big agricultural shows. And what do you find most in rural families is probably more an issue than it would be in dare I say, use the word city folk or whatever, but people who live in more congregated areas, the isolation and so on from rural for rural families. How does that affect their, I guess, dynamics in regard to what we're looking at is trying to create positive outcomes over the long term for the family? We're trying to create harmony and so on.
Sure.
So tell me how you see that playing out in rural type families.
Well, I think that, as you quite rightly sort of identify, the main issue for many rural families is the sense of isolation and distance from people, resources, and help in those scenarios. And I guess also the nature of the experience of working the land and being in those very sort of large and open spaces means that often you spend a lot more time doing your own thing on your own, being your own person. So coming together and being able to talk about things, share your what's working, what's not working for you can be very difficult for them. I think also culturally, it's a slightly different world out there. And I say that hopefully respectfully because I don't come from out there. But I know that for a lot of men, it's a very different world, a very different attitude out there. And sometimes feeling able to come and talk, being able to talk about what they're thinking and feeling can be quite a strange experience for them. So that's something that's been there. One of the challenges of male therapist has always been that there are very few of us. Most of this world is sort of populated by women. So again, being able to present a male understanding and a male approach to men sometimes gives them greater confidence and opportunity to talk about what really matters to them, which sometimes they struggle to do with a woman in a counselling setting. So I think it gives them an opportunity. The most important thing now is about access. And what we're looking for, I guess, in all family issues is around common goals, approaches that work together, and actually being able to understand each other's perspective. Because, again, in rural succession, my understanding would be one of the biggest issues is how do you actually logistically set that up, and how do you split a farm or do an inheritance. But for me, it's more about the emotional toll that takes on people, the level of grief, letting go, changing roles, transitions, the sense of potential competition or conflict over choices. All of those things I think are very powerful for rural communities.
Certainly in regard to, there's a couple of issues raised there. And so the first question is, does that mean women are much more empathetic than men? The fact you've got more counsellors who are females than males?
I think it's an interesting reflection, because it's sort of the more medical you go, the more men there are. The more emotional you go, the more women there are. So I guess you can draw your own conclusions around that. I think that the issue for men is that they often struggle to be able to acknowledge and allow their feelings to come through. They often find it quite hard to control emotional reactivity at times because it's not their familiar world. So working with men, I think, can sometimes give them a greater comfort zone around being able to talk, you might get me or you understand me type of thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And before we started, that was one of the comments I had with you, Neil, was that, when it comes to, and having done this for a few years, when I talk to a family and say, I think it's to everyone's benefit that mum and dad go and seek a counsellor, and we try and point them in the right direction. Women are very open to going to see the counsellor. For men, sometimes it's a lot harder because men don't need help with this sort of stuff, do they?
Well, I'm here to tell you, after 28 years, yes, they do. But yes, they often don't realise that, and sometimes until it's too late.
Yeah. Yeah, they need help just as much. Men need help. We do just as much as women do. But it's just an interesting perception is that they're open to it more
Yeah,
than guys
I
in
think
a lot of
often
cases.
in terms of counselling for women in couples work, what you'll find is that women are much more readily able to make an appointment or seek help and support. And part of the issue is also is they want someone else to talk to their partner because they're having troubles being heard.
Yeah.
And so that's the dynamic that comes up.
Now, your key area of work and expertise, Neil, is in helping couples
Yep.
counselling, isn't it? So,
Yep.
more than anything else, you're dealing with couples. So that in
Mm.
itself, and I know you can't tell any stories, but that in itself must provide for interesting observations from time to time. And I think
Yep.
it's great that that couples can go to one person to get help rather than it's like going to two different lawyers is one thing, but sort of if you can
No, the
do it
couples.
together, it's much better
Yeah.
outcome.
Well, it tends to be because the problem is in the dynamic between the couple. So if you haven't got them both there, you don't see the dynamic. So it's very important to work with a couple, and even if you're doing a mediation with family or adult children, it's very important to have them together at some point, because then you get to see what is it that's happening between them, and that will be a story that probably goes a long time past in that family. So it's important to see that. But yes, majority of couples work. It's very entertaining. It's very interesting, and sometimes it's quite surprising.
Sure. Now, mental health issues. I mean, whichever way you
Mm.
cut it, that's kind of where we're going with all these
Yeah,
conversations and the need for
yeah.
counselling. So we'll call it what it is. If you have a broken leg, it's easy to see that you've got a broken leg and you go to the doctor without too much whinging
Yeah.
about it. But
Mm.
mental health is something that's not as visibly obvious, but maybe not to yourself, but sometimes you need other people to help
Yeah.
to have that conversation to get you there in the first place. I'm
Yeah.
going to ask an interesting, hopefully interesting question. That is mental health hereditary?
Well, there's no doubt that the evidence seems to suggest that issues around depression can be in the family. They certainly get passed down. So, are there mental health conditions that are part of the gene pool? I think the answer to that is almost certainly yes. But again, the same old story with the nature nurture debate is how much it's one or how much it's the experience. What we do know is a lot of mental health issues get sort of settled in young children, early attachment issues, early life experiences, and the dynamics of families set people up in later life to have particular issues or struggle. The main issues that we're dealing with, interestingly, we would talk a lot about anxiety and depression, and we would say that they are very sort of almost pandemic-y in our culture in this day and age. A lot of stuff is also around the capacity for people to let go or grieve. So there's a lot of grief work that needs to be done, and sometimes that can be very easily mislabeled as depression or anxiety, when actually it's someone's natural and normal process of letting go. And again, when we think of grief, the most important thing about grief is we always assume, oh, someone's died, that's why we're grieving. The reality is, no, we grieve all the time, and transition, change of role, loss of function, loss of relationship, loss of purpose, all of those things trigger powerful grief responses. So a lot of the work we do is around managing and understanding and releasing some of that stuff. The other thing with couples, of course, is the conflict resolution, because the one thing couples love to do is fight. And so how you manage your fighting. And it's to say, one of the most important things to say around that is that never think that conflict is wrong. Conflict is a necessary and normal part of any relationship, which I could explain why, but it probably would take too long. But the reality is, it's not whether we do conflict, it's how we conflict. And becoming capable of conflicting productively means the capacity to collaborate and work together. And so part of the counseling role is always to look to see opportunities to get a couple or a family to work with each other, not against each other, which is so often when they walk through the door, that's where they're standing.
They're working against each other.
Yeah.
Interesting thing too is with a lot of the families we work with, especially with elderly parents who are still
Mm.
in charge on the
Yeah.
farm, running the farm, telling
Yeah.
everyone what to do and so on. you've raised an interesting issue in regard to grief, and which probably hits, and we're heading in the right direction together here. I think is that the biggest issue for Dad, especially giving up running the farm, is the grief of loss of identity, purpose, and so on. Is that a fair observation?
Oh, totally. I think that it's something that we fail to acknowledge as openly as we need to, because that role transition can be incredibly destabilizing for anyone at any stage of life, but particularly at later life, which is what, one of the reasons that we know for men, retirement is a very dangerous thing, because the correlation between retirement and death becomes quite close. And so for a lot of men to let go of their identity, the thing that they've done for decades, and to suddenly find themselves seemingly superfluous or unnecessary is a very difficult thing to manage. So you need to prepare for it, and you need to think it through, and you need to help people realize that life is just a transition to something new, not the end of something that I'm never going to do again.
Had someone in a meeting yesterday tell me that retirement means taking up crocheting. I hadn't heard that one before. Sort of taking up bowls and golf and all that.
Yes. I'm not rushing for the crochet sticks, that's for sure. And realizing that for a lot of men, they've worked so very, very hard all their lives, and physically, emotionally, they've had to carry the whole pressure of the farm and the success and everything that they have to do. So again, when you hand that over, it's such a void in your identity and a void in your meaning making, that for a lot of people they resist that, because they just think, oh, another year, or another 6 months, or I'll hand it over, but I'll keep my thumb in the pie, because that gives me purpose and meaning. But the problem is that creates different dynamics and different struggles elsewhere.
So what you're saying is really the and the men generally take the responsibility. It's a cross they carry. It's a weight on their shoulders. All those sorts of things. Yeah. And it's sort of a badge of honor in a lot of ways too, isn't it? Is that I'm the one responsible. I'm the one protecting the family. I'm the one holding the cross, and I'm the one out slaying dragons and all that sort of stuff. And
it feeds the heroic male ego very well.
But so when it's time to hand over to Johnny Jr., it's not just about the transition to the next generation. It's about what's my identity. But I used to be really important. I used to walk down the street and everyone went, here comes Fred. He's he's the land baron from Whoop Whoop, and so it's just a very big issue for them. So it's when we look at it and we talk to graziers about it's time to let go. Let's start handing over bit by bit over to the next generation. It's not about. I mean, obviously the kids can never do anything as well as Dad can. I mean, that's just
of course
that's a given. But it's not really about that, is it? It's about you're going to move into my house. You're where am I going to live? Who am I going to be? What am I going to do? I'm still valuable, and a lot of times they are, and it's worthwhile them still having a role on the farm into the future. They might move. Mum and Dad might move out to the cottage, and the kids come in and grow their family in the main homestead. But also they can still get Dad to go and check the fences, check the waters, and drive the truck and all that sort of stuff. He doesn't have to be in the yard with the cattle and putting his life at risk.
I think the challenge, I think, with all families in that respect, in terms of the elders or the people that are letting go, is it's not an either or. It's not either I'm doing everything or I'm doing nothing. It's that also and. It's that I'm handing this over, but I'm still part of it. But again, for a lot of people, it's around the role of authority and power, and letting someone else make choices that I make or have made for decades. And giving that away again it's an emotional struggle. It's not a physical struggle. It's in the mind, and working people through that, helping them realize that it's a positive, and working together, collaborating with the next generation instead of resisting or abandoning the next generation is very important.
Well, the transition is a very important part of what we do, and guiding people through that, and that's why We have counsellors. We have a guy that runs a business called Transition Planning Australia and so on, who I spoke to a few weeks ago. And it's about finding new things to do and a new purpose and meaning for dad mainly. And it's not that mum's not just as important, but mums seem to be able to make the transition to being grandma and finding other things to do a lot easier.
The upsetting thing is that women, on the whole, are much more flexible and adaptable than we men.
Yeah, that's right. Now, I'm just going to throw a word out there, Neil, that it's bandied around a lot lately, and it's kind of like a panacea. It's like it covers everyone's mental health issue, and that's narcissism. It is a real thing, and that helped me to understand narcissism is on a scale, isn't it? So everyone has a bit. And some are at the low end of the scale and some are at the high end of the scale. Is that a fair comment?
I think absolutely. The issue with narcissism, like any sort of mental health condition, is it tends to be on a spectrum. So on a good day, it's pretty low, but on a very bad day, it can be very reactive. So that's there. From a clinical point of view, a clinical narcissist is not a very nice person at all. The diagnosis and the criteria for that are extreme, and they're not so common. What we have, though, is a lot of people who are very wounded and very damaged, and that manifests in their own self-protection, which then comes through as quite selfish and quite self-focused. And one of the things that we've come to do is be able to see that and label that as narcissistic tendencies or narcissistic behavior, which is usually driven by people's lack of security, their own anxiety, and their feeling out of control. So narcissism is definitely alive and kicking. We're much more aware of it now, but I would still caution labeling people as narcissists because they are much fewer and far between. But what you do have is people that would exhibit strong narcissistic behavior when threatened, when anxious, when they feel they're out of control, or when they feel that someone else is trying to take something away from them.
Okay, good summary. Thank you. In sort of summarising, not finishing it, but in summary, the sort of things that continually show up from what you're saying, Neil, is anxiety seems to be a very, very regular issue. Is that correct?
Yeah, anxiety is a product of relationship. Just being in a relationship produces anxiety because you are you and they are they, and they're not you, so they're not doing what you want. So just being in relationship, and even as a couple, as parents, as siblings, it's all the same. So that generates anxiety. A lot of the struggles for us will be emotional rigidity, which is this sense in which I want what I want is right, what I want is the best thing. If you don't agree with me, we've got a problem. It's that sense of people wanting to be in control because that limits their anxiety. So helping people understand their anxiety is really important. Helping people understand their brain function is also really important, because when anxiety is around, our brain function deteriorates and we become much more reactive, which is a bottom brain thing, and we start to react instead of respond. And so in a lot of couples work and family work, you've got to keep people away from that anxious reactivity.
There's been a number of people that we've worked with over the last few years, Neil, where we've actually wheeled, dare I use that word, but we've wheeled the whole family in one by one to catch up with a counsellor, starting mum and dad, each of the kids and so on, because in a lot of ways, the kids needed to know how to understand how to better relate to the parents, and the parents need to learn how to better relate and communicate with the kids. The word that keeps coming up with estate and succession planning for us, and it's not just a word, but it's communication. And communication issues are very high on the radar in regard to issues within families. And I think as time has gone past, back in olden days, for example, grandparents talking about money was considered vulgar. You didn't talk about money. That was a vulgar conversation. And nowadays,
sex, money, and death.
Yeah, that's right. So, but nowadays, the younger generation speak more openly and in a lot of ways communicate more easily. So people in the 60s, 70s are sort of at in-between period. People older than that tend to find it hard
Yeah.
to have the conversations around estate planning, succession planning,
Yeah.
and so on. So the different intergenerationally is big issues there, and sometimes kids and the parents both need help, don't they, to be able to have a nice open
Totally.
conversation.
And the generation you're referring to, traditionally are known as the silent generation, which is, you're right, they just don't talk about emotional things or things that are important or things that they think are private. So it is a huge thing to bring that into a sort of more public arena. For children, understanding their parents is a major issue, because we all think that everybody's like us. And so to, again, make those adjustments, learn to listen. The issue for me with communication is it's rarely about the communication. It's usually about the message tolerance. It's I don't like what I'm hearing and I'm reacting to that. So a lot of the time we're trying to help people stay calm, listen, even if they don't like, but in order to get understanding and meaning instead of just reacting out of their emotional response. And that's a crucial thing. So it's not so much teaching people to communicate better. It's actually about teaching people to listen better and respond more clearly, as opposed to reacting. Because when we react, we tend to say things that we later regret.
So we've never done any of that.
Yeah, it's.
I'd known that earlier. No, that's fine. Hey, Neil, it's been great chatting with you today. Thank you for coming on and giving of your time today. Neil, you've got a business there in, let's just say, Nerang. That's easy to spell, and most people know where that is. Nerang in southeast Queensland. And your business is, your practice is called Talk, Learn, Grow. So
yes,
anyone wants to have a chat to you, that's where they head to.
Yeah, most welcome. Because it is better to talk, because when you talk, you learn, and when you learn, you grow, and then things change. So it is. Doing it alone is much harder. So I welcome anybody that feels that they want some support and to understand themselves and the situation better.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for your time today, Neil. Look forward to chatting to you again soon.
Okay. Take care, mate.
Have a great weekend. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.